All right. Thank you for joining us, everybody. So awesome. So I just want to do a quick intro. Really, this session is really focused on the providers that have joined us. I think that we all know when it comes to providing affirming healthcare or any type of services for the LGBTQ plus community, everybody deserves to have access to the same services and the same quality of services. I think we can all agree on that. But of course, finding affirming providers is not always the easiest for our community. Many folks report that providers don't understand the issues involving their sexuality or gender identity. Some providers can be downright hostile or even refuse to provide us with services or healthcare. There are major implications behind this. A lot of individuals in our community will go without seeking out healthcare, seeking out services. We have individuals who are homeschooling their children, keeping their children out of daycares or not sending them to overnight summer camp because we're concerned about their safety. We have individuals trying to buy homes on their own without realtors because they're concerned about being discriminated against. So we definitely want to push back against all of those things. A lot of times we hear businesses and providers and they'll have things on their signs that says like LGBTQ welcoming, LGBTQ friendly, but being an affirming provider or an affirming business goes a step beyond, right? Being affirming is being willing to really make space for people. It's getting to know and understand their identity, accepting of what it means to them, willing to avoid ignorance and prejudice about their experiences. And of course, understanding that people should have rights despite their identities. Affirming providers, of course, take an active role in doing those things and creating those spaces for those who they serve. So tonight, I should say, we have Adam, child care provider. We have Jackie from Camp Highlight, Dr. Cruz, medical provider, and Jeff, who's a real estate professional. So they are going to meet with us, give a brief intro of themselves, give us maybe some things that are affecting their industries uniquely. And then we will just open up the floor for individuals to engage with them and ask questions. So I think that we will just go in the order that I introduced everyone. Did we get that? So that would be Adam, Jackie, Dr. Cruz, and Jeff. So Adam, you're up.
So, good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Moskowitz. I use he, him pronouns. I am currently a director of childcare in the city of Philadelphia, and I've been in childcare for the past 6.5 years in just a wide variety of capacities. And I am just, finding quality childcare right now is a struggle for everyone, not just LGBTQ plus families, but I know that is a unique, unique clientele that do need care. And I have been fortunate enough as a director to have had a couple of LGBTQ plus families in my centers. I will say that right now, because we're in the time of COVID, staffing in childcare and education in the industry is a major challenge right now. And from a director standpoint, if I do not have enough staff, I cannot take your lovely children. And right now we're in the situation of where I need to be really careful with how many kids I take into my center, because being a licensed child care center, there are certain rules and regulations that I must follow in order to stay open. And one of those has to do with staffing. Based on your child's age, dictates how many teachers I need in that classroom and what my maximum class size is. So for example, if you have an infant and you're looking for infant care. Legally, I'm only allowed to have one teacher for every 4 infants. If I only have one infant teacher in my center right now and I have 4 babies, I have to put your child on the wait list until I get another staff member or I make moves internally. So I just want to kind of share that, as we hear about the staffing crisis in childcare and education, and there are many reasons for that, but that's not what the session is about. That could be its own separate session. But from a director standpoint, who's in the middle of that, I just want to put that out there first of all, just so providers like myself can share with families some of the behind the scenes insights on kind of what's going on, that if you're not in the childcare realm, you may not necessarily know that might be a challenge. Also too, just finding high quality care. We talk about how schools get rated based on like test scores and whatnot in childcare. In PA, we use the Keystone Stars is a type of accreditation, and there's also an NACCE accreditation. And the Keystone Stars is kind of PA's way of rating what high quality childcare looks like. So a star 1, for example, is basically just you have a certificate of compliance. And then as you go to star 3, star 2, and star 4, the most you can get are 4 stars. The higher quality childcare is being provided, and there are very specific guidelines on what makes a center a star 2, star 3, star 4. And I think having accreditation is important. Another type of accreditation you might see is called the NACCE accreditation, and NACCE stands for the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And they are like the governing accreditation body in ECE. They're a organization, and they kind of dictate like what best practices are. Some facilities, if they have NACCE accreditation, they supersede the STARS accreditation because NACCE standards are a little bit higher than what STARS are. So if you see a facility that is NACCE accredited, that is the highest quality childcare available in the country and in the state of Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Adam. All right, Jackie.
It's me. I'm Jackie. I am a director and co-founder of Camp Highlight, which is a 12-year-old summer camp that runs for children who have LGBTQ+ parents and caregivers. We started right around the time marriage equality was being questioned, and we really found that Chris is the other director and founder. We were looking as camp people to do something that really would make a difference in our world, and that for an issue that we felt like really spoke to us. And with marriage equality having been on the line back then, we were like, who really needs a place of togetherness is kids with LGBTQ caregivers and parents. So that's what we do. We have a 1-week overnight camp in Pennsylvania, about an hour outside of Philly, maybe a little bit more, Reading-ish area. And we rent a YMCA, and our campers are ages 8 to 15. And we have approximately 65 campers each summer. Keeping it small and intimate is a really great way that we form year-long and lifelong bonds amongst the families. Then we grew to having a leadership academy because the kids who graduated at 15 said, we're not done yet. We want to come back for more. So we created a program for 16 and 17-year-olds. And they operate during the same week on the same campground, but as a separate curriculum. And their curriculum is really about exploring who they want to be as they enter adulthood and what their goals are, and how to have effective communication and make a difference in this world and really explore themselves. So that's been running for 5 or 6 years altogether. And then the parents were like, not fair. We want to come to camp. And so we opened our family camp weekend, which is in October. It's a 3-day weekend, and families come together, parents and children of all ages, 0 to 17. And they get to experience our traditional programming as a unit and really focusing on those bonds and celebrating families. Camp itself is like a traditional recreational camp, but we really focus on our virtues curriculum. So we're always incorporating like peace, generosity, acceptance, responsibility, respect, and all of this intertwining that into all of the activities. So if we're playing, a game like a sports game, soccer, like what does cooperation mean to you and why do we use this and whatnot? And so the campers are really like growing and thriving. And our goal with Camp Highlight is to strengthen them as humans within their family, but also to hopefully send out even stronger humans out into their communities, wherever they come from, so that they can help all of everything that we're doing to make this world a more kind and accepting place for a lot of different folks that we're around. So yeah, that's Camp Highlight.
That's really awesome. I'm going to have to look it up for my kids. Yeah. Next is Dr. Cruz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mario Cruz. I am the founder and medical director of pediatrics at Philadelphia Fight. You may have heard of Fight previously. Fight's well known for its HIV work. Fight was founded 30 years ago as an AIDS research organization and eventually a treatment organization. And over the years, we've expanded to become a full-fledged health center, really for everyone age 0 to 99. And 5 or 6 years ago, I was recruited to actually build the pediatric practice. So I had the privilege of, thinking like, what do you want to build and how do you build it? And one of the things that was really important is building a place where people feel not just tolerated, but welcome and embraced, and in some cases loved. And to do that as a practice, operationally, that's not just like, oh, I have a provider who's affirming to who I am. It's everything from your marketing materials to what the space looks like, to what books you have in your waiting room, to what the check-in forms look like, to what questions the EMR asks you, to how you train your staff and how you recruit your staff and how you educate and correct your staff when they do things that inadvertently make people feel less than. And so, as you look for gender affirming pediatric practices or adult practices, those are all the things that you want to think of. It's not just the provider that you see, it's all those elements of care. I'm going to brag for 2 seconds about our practice, because the one thing I'm most proud of is it's just a really diverse place in that you really get a slice of all of Philadelphia. And when you're in our waiting room, you'll see, kids from Guatemala who just got to this country a month ago, and this is their first experience with healthcare. And you might see a gay couple with their child who's coming in, and it's their first experience with healthcare as parents. And they're kind of nervous because they're not sure if we're gonna quote unquote accept them or make them feel okay. And you have a middle-class family from suburban Pennsylvania, and you have a family who's living in a shelter who's seeing you. And you have just everybody, and it's really beautiful. It's the really healthcare should be. And I would argue, Shanay, you were saying earlier that like everyone should get the same care. I actually think some patients need better care, because we're trying to reverse the harms that come with discrimination. And so we actively try to give specific subgroups of patients, including LGBTQ communities, better care above and beyond everybody else. You can tell who I voted for. That's all I got.
Oh, love that. Thank you. Thanks for that. That's awesome. And Jeff, yeah.
Hey, thanks, Shanay. My name is Jeff Chirico. I am a realtor and a team leader with Berkshire Hathaway Fox and Roach Realtors in Chestnut Hill. I have been in the business for 7 years. Prior to that, I spent couple decades working in television news and specifically in investigative reporting in a couple markets outside Philadelphia, and then came to Philadelphia and worked in television news. But my background in advocacy for viewers definitely, I feel, translates into what I do now in real estate. Unfortunately, in real estate, the LGBTQ plus population has a lower home ownership rate than the general population. General population is around 65%, and the LGBTQ plus identifying population is about 49%. So we have a 16% gap there. And I do think, I mean, there's obviously many reasons, we talked about that, but I think one of the reasons perhaps is finding affirming real estate agents and figuring out how to go about finding that. And of course, it's the fear of discrimination too, right? I mean, there's countless problems. LGBTQ people tend to, there's a larger concentration in the cities, and sometimes in those areas, the prices of homes are more expensive, which makes it unaffordable, and a whole long list of reasons why. I work in the city, but I do most of my work in the suburbs, and I've had the very unique experience and really pleasurable experience of working with couples as they are moving from the city into the suburbs, more often than not, to start to build and start their family and start to grow their family, finding schools or home, more space, and it has been extremely rewarding. My husband and I adopted our son about 10 years ago from foster care, so we did the same thing. We left the city, we moved into the suburbs, and now I'm seeing that play out more and more. We can go, I think we'll probably have other opportunities to talk about those tips and suggestions, but I think I'll probably end there and let Shanay take over from here.
Actually, it is time for those in attendance to take over. Let us hear your questions for our providers. Does anybody have any questions? You can turn your microphone on. You can drop it in the chat.
I'll jump in if that's all right. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about the people who've spoken, and maybe you too, Shanay, about any personal experiences with either affirming providers that you've had that were just like wow moments where you're like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like, or maybe the opposite, when you were like, oh, this is actually a deal breaker, I'm going someplace else. And I'll just say for my family, what Mario was saying about, it's not just the provider themselves, it's like everything that surrounds them. And so I've, had experiences where like I did all this research, went to the provider, but then like the walk in the door, the first person I interacted with was not positive. And so I'll just highlight that as well. But anyway, that's my question of what maybe some kind of salient moments that people have been like, oh, this is actually really, I feel very affirmed. I don't know.
I mean, when I start working with a couple, especially if I know that we are dealing with an LGBTQ couple or buyer, single person, I shouldn't say couple. I think one of the first things I always do is ask them, obviously, what their pronouns are. I want to obviously be conscious of that, asking about their family makeup. I think, and I don't know, Stephanie, that I have an exact experience like that, but from what my clients have said is just those little steps go a long way to make them feel welcome, make them feel like they belong in the space of buying homes in the suburbs and or in the city. But I think, you're right. It's just so much of it is watching our language and the way we speak. And I know I've experienced that where I had, a female landscaper come to my house to give me a quote, and the words that she was using, I thought were really inappropriate. And I don't think she meant any harm by it, but I was just turned off by it. And I just refused to hire her, and I don't know if she has a mean bone in her body, but I just was immediately turned off, and she lost the business. And so I think that's an experience of, just watching our language so closely, because yes, I'm gay, but I don't know the same struggles as trans people are going through. And I think there's a lot that I still have to learn about that. And there's stuff that we all have to learn about. And so I think just being so conscious of our language and how we speak as providers is important.
I can share one experience. When my wife and I were planning our wedding, we reached out to quite a few DJs, and then we reached out to one gentleman, and I think his standard paperwork that like he just collects has like bride and groom on it. Of course, it always says bride and groom because that's just what it says. But we could see he asked, what we would like to be referred to, and we said, we're both going to be brides, and we could see that he went back, and before he sent us the paperwork, he edited everything. So everything just said like bride 1, bride 2, and it would seem like such a small gesture, but it made us feel so like affirmed and proud that he was going to be the DJ at our wedding. We were like, wow, he actually went back and took the time like to change all of this before he sent it to us, because he was like, oh no, I don't want to offend anybody. And now he has that paperwork like on hand, and he's ready to like have different paperwork for different types of couples. And I was like, oh, that was so awesome of him. Yeah.
I love that. That's so sweet that he changed all the paperwork. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more, is just how everything in schools or whatnot is changing language. And I think that's been really important. At camp, I send my kids not to Camp Highlight because nobody wants to go to camp where their mom is. So like to find, when you create such a beautiful place, you have to find some place for your kid to thrive outside of this. So it's not just Camp Highlight is not the only show in town, and is not the only good camp, but it is very triggering to think that you're putting your kids into somebody else's hands and you don't get to see them for however long you send them, 1 week or 2 weeks or whatnot. So I remember like looking for a camp for my kiddos, and I was like, everything was a sign. Like, what does their paperwork look like? How are they going to act when they hear like all of this, just like the slightest tone just can totally set you into even choosing the location for Camp Highlight. I called a lot of different campsites, and some of them, I would tell them what our mission was, and they would be like, and I was like, okay, so not you, until we called the South Mountain YMCA, which is where we settled for the last decade. And they were like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. We would be excited to have you here. And we were like, thank you.
Anyone else? I love that question, Stephanie.
So, as a director, and anytime you're in childcare, there's a bunch of paperwork you have to get done when you enroll, and just there's a lot. And recently, what I've been finding just in the realm of childcare is, we have, the one form that state used to have, it says like mother, father, but what our forms for like an emergency contact say, it might say mother/guardian or father/guardian too, and like, just being mindful of that, I think, in ECE is just really important. And then, we also recognize that there are some parents who are single parents, maybe not necessarily by choice, or sometimes by choice. Like, I have a family who just enrolled in my center, and they're not part of the LGBTQ+ community, but as I'm going through the paperwork, I asked the parent, I'm like, is there a second parent or guardian that you would like to put down? And she's like, oh no, the dad's deceased. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. So I think, for me as a director is, I don't assume anything. And I think that's important too. But on the other side of it too, people need to not assume things about like me in childcare, because I am a male in childcare. How many times have I gotten on the phone and they're like, oh, thank you, ma'am, or thank you, or oh, I spoke to a woman on the phone about coming to pick up an application. And I'm like, that was me. Oh, I'm sorry. So, those types of things too, I think it's important to kind of recognize sometimes that goes both ways.
Yari, You have your hand up, Gary? You want to share something?
I did. Let me see if I can get my video back on. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Yari, they, them, theirs. I'm joining you from Lenape Land, New York City. I'm single and white, Jewish, trans, prospective parent adopting older kids. My big question, great to see some familiar faces. My big question is like, I am a huge type A planner. Like I want to locate the best providers, the best options. I'm also very conscious. I'm going to be doing older kid adoption. I have no idea of the timeline. I have no idea when the kids arrive. And I worry about the catch-22 of like, you found an affirming doctor or school or program. You don't quite have the kid's name or yet the legal authority to register them. Do the expert providers on the panel tonight have any tips for planning for the unexpected, for trying to find affirming and quality providers for one's family, wherever you are?
I'll say just from the pediatric standpoint, picking a pediatric office is not like picking a spouse. So you may pick one and it might not be the right one, and that's okay. And you can change that later. So I would sort of like really demystify that whole process, or like take the temperature down on that specific aspect of it. And I forget the other questions you asked. You asked about, yeah, and looking for a place that's just flexible, right? I mean, and a place that does a lot of adoption work and understands that everything doesn't happen on the timeline that it needs to happen in.
Yari, I can chime in from the real estate perspective. Since you aren't quite sure where you may end up, whether you are renting or buying in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, wherever, there are two LGBTQ plus trade organizations within the real estate industry. And they are, you can find them at realestatealliance.org and also at, this is weird, nagelrep.org. That's NAGLREP.org. And in both of those, you can just put in the name of the city and then you can search. Typically, they are going to be what they call gay or allies. Whether they are affirming might be a different story and may need a little bit more of your kind of scouting out and calling them and talking with them. But that's a good place to at least get started to find out what they say about themselves. And hopefully you might be able to find someone that you can then kind of make some phone calls and figure out who might work for you. But that's one place to go that would kind of expand, that would span the, coast to coast.
I know I come from the childcare realm, but if you're thinking about schooling, public school or any type of education institution, even if you call them up and just ask like, hey, like, what is the enrollment process? What does your wait list look like? Because like I know at my center there might be a wait list when parents call them like, hey, I may not have openings till 2 months, and some parents are like, oh, good, I'm not looking for care until 2-3 months anyway. And starting that process, or just on your end understanding what's going to be required for registration, the type of documents that you might need to register your child. So just some food for thought there as well.
And Yuri, I just wanted to thank you for adopting an older child. That's something that not a lot of folks do, and it really it's just awesome. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say like I feel like people who adopt older people should be treated like veterans and have like special parking spots and be treated with extra reverence. It really just it is a service to all of us. So thank you. The one thing I wanted to comment a little bit earlier on, this wasn't a question, but it's just something that I feel like they need to say. I want to make sure folks feel like they feel empowered to make places more gender affirming. And what I mean by that is not everyone knows everything, right? And a lot of places have leaders that are humble enough to be willing to change, but they can only change if they know there's a problem. So I'll give you one example. I had a baby who was being raised non-binary. Baby was born and the parents assigned they them pronouns for the baby. And as a pediatrician, the baby's got a growth chart. So every time you come in, the baby gets plotted on a chart. The baby's sex assigned at birth was female. And so our EMR system automatically plots the baby on a female chart. It just happens, right? It's just automatically programmed. I have no control over that. And I had never thought that that would ever be an issue until this parent brought it up to me. And now I still can't change it because it's hardwired into the computer, but at least now I know that this family had an issue with that, and I can at least not preempt, but like explain what's going on to future families so that they don't think that I'm sort of naive about this issue. Or I have parents that have called out issues on our paperwork. You know, we have 2 families where there's 3 parents involved, and our paperwork only allowed for 2 people to be listed as like emergency contacts. And so we were able to change our paperwork because of that feedback from the parents. And so people can change and grow, and it's an unfair burden that you have to make the system better. But I think that's just how it is for any marginalized group. Like, it's up to us to make things better for the next generation or next group.
Dr. Cruz, that makes me think, first of all, the paperwork, thanks for that. I run into that a lot with my own child that I co-parent with his father, and then I also have my wife, and a lot of times it's like, well, he technically has 3 parents, and I have to like bump somebody as an emergency contact, but they're not tagged as his parent, so it's not really clear. But you were saying leaders and being willing to change and be flexible if things are brought to their attention. In addition to being the assistant director at PFP, I also work at an acute inpatient facility, behavioral health in a pediatric unit. And, you know, the leadership is awesome, but we're not the ones who are really on the front lines of dealing with our patients. It's usually, you know, the behavior techs. Do you have any tips on training? Because it's this major thing of like the trickle down effect. Like, we feel like we get it and we're very affirming and we do all these things, but we are still really overwhelmed with, you know, complaints from parents and guardians because of errors and things that children are reporting from the direct care staff. So do you have any tips on that, of getting it down to where it needs to be? Because leadership, we're not the ones that are really interacting with the patients all day, every day.
Yeah, no, that's tough, because they're the front line, right? And that's the person picking up the phone, who's seeing new patients and greeting you when you walk in. And so I think people respond to stories. I think teaching, we call them frontline staff. So making sure your frontline staff understands the why. Like, so I can teach you like what pronouns are and when to use them in different situations, but you have to know why it's important. You know, there's a sign in my clinic that says, it says like using the correct pronouns is suicide prevention, right? That stuff's powerful. That stuff's really powerful. And so if you start with why, I think then you can sort of really make an impact. If you start with what to do and how to do it, they're just gonna think it's some like politically correct thing that you have to do, that my boss wants me to do. And so, and a lot of frontline staff understand what it's like to be discriminated against. So I'm a straight, cisgender, Black, Latinx man. I haven't experienced all forms of discrimination, but I know what it's like to feel unwelcome, you know? And I guarantee everyone on your front line knows that feeling. And so if you can take them back to what it felt like for them to feel less than, and they can translate that to the LGBT plus community, I think that's where you can actually make some progress.
Thank you. Thank you. I was like writing, taking notes. I'll design my next training. Let me see. We have some people that came in. Anyone else in attendance have any questions for our providers? Stephanie, any more amazing questions?
I'm watching the Astros game and the Eagles game and listening. No, I'm just looking at the little play-by-play online, not actual the TV. I don't think so. I mean, a lot resonates, right? And I think what Jeff said is about sometimes it's just you don't click with someone, like the landscaper you were saying, like I think you have to trust your gut. Like I trust my gut. Like I think if I haven't and having people come to your house, I don't know if we talked about this too much, but like when you have contractors who are going to be in your home, like that's a whole nother level of intimacy, I guess. Versus if you're going somewhere, I mean, clearly dropping your kid off at camp is I would put that at the top. But then having like your dishwasher repairman come in, you don't know how that's going to go. And like, and I definitely think about like, do I say my wife is going to be home? Like, or what do I say, or how do I, or is usually it's a man, like, are they going to notice photos or, whatever. So, I really just go with my gut, and then obviously just getting recommendations from other people is a big one.
One of the questions that I do get to from people is said, well, where should I live? They're especially coming out of the city where they feel mostly, accepted and comfortable, and they're thinking of moving into the suburbs and like, oh, well, where should we live? And I'm not legally allowed to tell people where to live. That opens a whole can of worms. I can't tell them where there might be experiences of racism or homophobia. I'm just not allowed legally to do that. And so I tell my clients they need to do their own due diligence. They need to drive around the various communities that they're considering. And in this day and age, you can tell very quickly by looking at signs on front yards or whether they fit the kind of perhaps our communities are becoming more segregated by political affiliation, if nothing else. So you can very quickly pull into a suburban neighborhood, perhaps in a neighborhood in the city, and figure out kind of where do most of the people in that community, fall on political issues. And yes, that's not necessarily going to mean that you're going to be surrounded by people who are affirming, perhaps, but it may give you a better idea of kind of what that community is like. I also is to tell them, stop into diners and coffee shops, ask about the community. And then the one thing, there are websites like greatschools.org or niche.com, and I'll put it in the chat. But the other thing that I tell my clients to do, because I can't tell them where to live, but if they raise this issue to me about feeling comfortable in their community, I often will tell them to go check out the voting precinct results for the communities that they're considering. And you can find out, how they voted, how most of the people voted in the 2020 election. And that can have an eye-opening effect on their, on what neighborhoods they choose.
Thank you for that, Jeff. That actually came up. I don't know why I didn't think to ask you that, because that came up our session before. We had this safe space conversation for LGBTQ plus parents of color. And of course, that was something that came up. It's like, where are the safe spaces for us to live, and how do we figure that out? So thank you for sharing that. I've taken my notes on things to look for.
There's a question in the chat too, before we go to Patrick. I don't know, Shanay, if you saw that while you were chatting.
Is that for me? The one for me?
Yeah.
Sure. Stephanie, honestly, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months out before being ready to buy a house. If it's shorter, that's fine. But if you're thinking within the next year to 2 years, it's not a bad idea to speak with a real estate agent now, because they're going to connect you with a mortgage professional who can take a look at your financial picture, determine how close you are to being ready to purchase a home financially. And if you're not quite ready there and there's work to be done, that mortgage professional, if it's a good one, will guide you to help you figure out exactly what you need to do so that you are ready to buy on your timeline. You're welcome.
Thanks. Any more questions popping up? Anything else people are thinking
I
about?
think Patrick, yeah.
Oh, Patrick.
Hi, everybody. So I'm here with my wife, Renat, and this is our first Philly Family Pride event ever. We're in the fertility process, hopefully getting close. So we're just like so glad to see you all in this resource. And Dr. Cruz, I've got a question for you. I actually, so I'm a provider myself. I work in mental health care, and there was just a thanks first to something that you said. I'm a trans man, and there was a time where there was a new trans clinic being opened where we moved from in Massachusetts, and I was invited by someone to be a part of the potential patients focus group or whatever. And the question was basically what would make this like a trans affirming space for you? And I was just sort of looking around the room, listening to people be like, please don't traumatize me. Like, please get my name right. Please call me the right pronoun. And I just finally just got so pissed off and sick of it. And I said, if you're asking me what I would like in terms of healthcare, it would be exceptional healthcare. If you're giving me a $20 gift certificate for my answer, that's what it would be. It would be, exceptional healthcare. And you're the first provider that I've ever heard echo that back. So I just super appreciate that and want to say thank you. And my question for you is, as we start the whole pregnancy process, we are thinking about obviously finding a pediatrician for our family, but a midwife as well, and wondered if you might have, or anyone might have any recommendations for us.
I mean, I can tell you that the Refuge Midwifery, I don't know if you've heard of them, and Ray, they sponsor our events and conference. So I'll just transparency on that. But there's a reason they do, right? Because they're affirming, and because and I don't know if both midwives, but I know at least Ray identifies as a member of our community. And so they would be where I would start. There's also if you were looking more for in between the life cycle, it used to be the Bryn Mawr Birth Center, and now it's Life Cycle Woman Care, I think is what they call it. They had a whole big conversation about calling it woman care and being trans affirming for pregnant trans men. Anyway, but that place that's in Bryn Mawr is a midwifery, but a birth center. So they have a relationship with a local hospital, so you could go there and get midwife care versus being doing a home birth like with Refuge Midwifery. But then if there was an emergency, then they were right next to the hospital. I don't know if other folks have suggestions, but those are two that come right to mind.
I agree with those recommendations. We see a good amount of patients from both those places, and the recommendations are, and the feedback is always excellent. And often I often like to ask, what was your birth experience like compared to what actually happened? And very often it's right on, which is really great. It doesn't always happen that way, but often it happens exactly like they had planned and what they wanted. And and fingers crossed. Yeah, I wish you the best. I know it's a really stressful experience. It's hope and stress and all those things combined. And when you get to raise that baby, it's just gonna all be worth it. So I really wish the best for you.
Thank you so much.
And Stephanie put those links in the chat. Thanks for that.
There's also, I don't know if you were thinking about an OB at all. There's this doctor at Penn, and maybe is it Peter Vasquez? Is that the name? Am I messing that up? I had a parent who wanted to do a C-section, an elective C-section, and had trouble all around the city trying to do that. And this was one of the only people that would do that specifically to be gender affirming. And I'll do some Googling if I can to try to find the name, but I'll put that here if you need.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left. Anybody have any last minute questions before I hand it over to Stephanie to give us some announcements?
Y'all, the Phillies have the bases loaded. Just saying. 2 outs and Hoskins is up to bat.
All right.
Woohoo. My neighbor's texting me furiously also, I'm sure, about the game. This will be fun when people are watching it later on YouTube. Just, you know, this will be a fun part of the video, the recording. Game 5 World Series. Okay.
You have some announcements for us, Stephanie?
Sure. I was just waiting a second in case there was any other comments or questions. I'm going to put a bunch of stuff in the chat. The first thing is that we have an eval form for this session. So, or if you attended earlier sessions, you can fill out the same form multiple times. Please, please, please do that. And presenters too, if you'd like, because we read them, we use them, we save them, we look back at the last years when we're getting our conference going, and so that we can always improve what we're doing and the information and services we're providing. Also just plug tomorrow night, there are no sports games that I know of, so that there's no conflicts. I mean, at least the Eagles and Phillies aren't playing. Anyway, 6 to 7 o'clock, there's Tough Talks, Navigating Challenging Conversations with Youth with Nakia Outland from Prevention Meets Fashion. Followed by What's at Stake for Our Families in This Election, which is coming next week. We have Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, who's awesome. He's going to come talk about what's at stake at the state level. We have Diego Sanchez from the National PFLAG group to come talk about sort of the national political picture for our families. And then Michael Galvan is going to talk about, who's on our board and used to work for Mayor Kenny and is now actually a city council candidate, to talk about the implications for the city. And then lastly, tomorrow night from 8 to 9, we have our family reunion panel. That's our theme this year. And we're going to have some past board members and some young adults and youth who are and have been and are involved with both Philly Family Pride and Collage, to kind of, talk about what groups like PFP, not just us, but like Camp Highlight and others that are affirming groups for their family, like, means to them. So I think that'll be a really nice conversation. They're going to share some wisdom, all that fun stuff. I think that is it. Oh, Saturday, of course, when I'm not done. Saturday is our in-person, and we're going to be at Smith Playground from 10 to 3. We have some mixers. I'm always like, embrace the awkwardness. We're going to do some awkward stuff to embrace the awkwardness, get to know each other, and then be out in the playhouse or on the playground with families. And then you can actually be standing by people who you've met and you know something about, and you can get to know them better. We have great lunch planned. We have the sponsor fair, and then Jackie and the folks from Camp Highlight are going to do the carnival in the afternoon for kids to play games and get tickets and win prizes from 1 to 3. So folks know Smith Playground, we're going to be on either side on the porches, and then the tent at the entrance to the playground. There'll be balloons and stuff. You'll find us. So finally, Shanay's great idea, Saturday night from 6 to 9, we'll be at Stir Lounge in Center City for a post-conference adult mixer. So leave your kids at home for this one, or prospective parents, if you don't have kids, come on. And then I think they're waiving the cover charge.
Yeah, there's no cover.
They're waiving the
charge.
cover. There's no cover charge. It's just come hang out, look for Shanay. It'll be fun. All right, now I got to click over and see what happened in the game.
All right, I think that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great night. See you Saturday.